I'm a researcher and lecturer from the Robert Gordon University in Aberdeen in Scotland, and I'm pleased to be with you. And I'm looking forward to watching everybody's presentations later today as the conference progresses. If there is anything about my research that is of interest to you, please don't hesitate to be in contact with myself afterwards. Let me just... trying to get that to work. Okay. So I'll give you an overview of the main themes and approach taken in this research. In 2022, the Gulf state of Qatar will host the 22nd FIFA World Cup. This tournament follows on from a series of other sporting mega events where the principle of legacy is embedded on from a series of other for its delivery and purpose. So while claims for creating legacies are widespread, understanding how legacy is actually defined and perceived is an area of research in its infancy, and it is commonly misunderstood and currently without consensus agreement. This presentation will provide the background to existing scholarly analysis into legacy development as a research theme. An interpretive approach is adopted, which explores and catalogues legacy definitions within academic literature. These definitions will be analysed for predominant themes through a category framework. The findings will be discussed and compared against the legacy objectives of an upcoming event, which is the 2022 Qatar World Cup. And finally, this will lead to the creation of a new legacy definition specifically for the event itself. This is needed as there is limited examples already in existence within academic literature and will provide guidelines for how other researchers can understand and define legacy for an event. The conceptual understanding of what legacy is and how to define it has been difficult for both the researcher and the practitioner. Legacy as a concept has been underdeveloped, underexplored, exploited, and frequently misunderstood. Despite this, claims of creating a legacy are becoming a recurring buzzword that politicians, organizations, and stakeholders of all levels will utter as the justification for their project or event's existence, that it will leave a legacy for future generations. This is problematic in that legacy definitions mean different things to different people, and this shapes its context, understanding, and character to suit individual preferences. An approach to find a more formalized and focused understanding of legacy parameters would provide organizations a common foundation for facilitating positive legacy outputs. It would assist in clarifying the required knowledge and skills to strive to seek generational benefits. Unfortunately, at present, this is out of reach. The literature notes that the academic community has failed to provide a generally accepted or clearly understood definition of how legacy can be defined. It is in the sporting mega events such as the Olympics and Football World Cups that has seen the most exploration of legacy as a research theme. While the winners and losers of the event may live long in the collective memory, for the event host, legacy is an important factor for retrospectively determining the overall success of the games. Especially when events in the past have been very unsustainable. Some games have left millions of dollars of debt to host cities, created stadiums that won't be used after the games have finished, and a whole host of negative impact to communities. In response to this, the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, and FIFA have advanced the importance of legacy in their operations and outlook. It is a core value, and any nation bidding to host a sporting event needs to demonstrate what the legacy will be, not just as the games progress, but what their impact will be a generation later. In 2002, a defining moment in legacy development was initiated as the IOC held an international symposium to better understand and try to define legacy. It was an attempt to agree on clarification for how it could be correctly applied. Invited to this were a number of leading researchers and academics, and the outcome of the symposium was mixed. While there was advancements in recognizing the significance of legacies, ultimately researchers were unable to fully agree a definition of it. It did, however, generate subsequent research interest in the topic and inspire a range of attempts from academic authors to further explore characteristics and define what legacy could be. To understand how legacy is defined, an extensive literature review was conducted. All articles that made an attempt to define legacy were collated. The journal inclusion range was not restricted to a certain time frame, and all articles that met the selection criteria were considered. To represent the development of this research field, The two periods essential to its understanding were separated for investigation. The first period being the initial efforts in formulating legacy development definitions up to the academic output of the Olympic Symposium, which is in the period from 2000 to 2003. The other period that I review is the post-symposium years, which is 2004 to 2020. With this methodology, 12 academic legacy definitions were identified within the literature, as outlined in this diagram. Within the 12 articles, they were broken down to identify the characteristics of legacy within the definitions. It explored its core principles of the nature of legacy, when it begins, and how long it lasts, and who is impacted by it. This led to myself creating 3 legacy categories, as outlined in this diagram, to collect data and later compare with the legacy literature compared around the 2022 Qatar World Cup. Analysing the findings of the definitions, there were 7 journal articles identified that provided a definition of legacy before and through to the Olympic Symposium. Reviewing the frequency of legacy characteristics given, it reveals a period of establishing a conceptual understanding of legacy. The most common grouping of descriptions, 9 provided, was based on what the nature of legacy is or could be. Closely associated with this search for understanding was the repeated emphasis of time to the character of legacy. And while there was consistency for identifying that legacy should provide improvement in 4 of the 7 articles, what that improvement should be is barely explored. This, however, could be attributed to the newness of the research theme. It is understandable that it should take a maturity period to think beyond conceptual definitions and towards the application of legacy in specific contexts. This maturity theory seems to be confirmed in the legacy definitions provided post the Olympic Symposium through the period of 2004 and 2020. It shows a retraction in legacy type definitions and a 125% increase in impact definitions provided. The post-symposium articles, to a substantial extent, provide thoughts for outlining what legacy improvements will be. These descriptions often highlight that legacy can be expansive and also contradictory in its effect. It also gives prominence to an issue not addressed pre-2003, that there are too many assumptions that legacies made will be effective or that their planned benefits will materialize for their intended stakeholders. A notable deliverable from these selected articles was their increased inclusion for legacy having social or intangible features, such as new knowledge or community engagement. This being the most common definition type articulated. This seemed to be counter to earlier research where the majority of focus is on the physical or tangible infrastructure, such as stadiums or the economic impact of developing this tangible legacy. There are no specific definitions of legacy for the Qatar 2022 World Cup, and this research will provide one based on an analysis of the previous legacy literature and the planned Qatar FIFA World Cup legacy objectives and initiatives. There are 5 2022 Qatar World Cup legacy objectives. These are categorized as human, social, economic, environmental, and sporting. Each legacy definition is supported by a range of design initiatives to realize and deliver these ambitions. When applied to the legacy definition categories set out by the author, there is an extensive range, 28, of improvement and impact considerations. The extent of this is similar to the results of the most recent definitions post-2003. As legacy concepts and literature evolve, these findings denote that the Qatar event is firmly aligned with the most current understanding for defining legacy. A pronounced feature of the Qatar World Cup plan is the appraisal of time and an emphasis that is heavily weighted towards the long term and the future rather than the immediate hosting of the event itself. This aligns with some of the fundamental legacy literature, which suggests that true legacy is based around multi-generational outcomes based on an extended life cycle post-event. The Qatar method for developing a legacy is based upon an approach that is just starting to begin to find traction within the literature, to embed sustainability measures as a foundation for achieving legacy objectives. The Qatar World Cup initiatives are some of the most ambitious for interconnecting sustainability and legacy. Conceptually, there's a substantial overlap. Both legacy and sustainability share a similar categorization in that they focus on a long-term future. It is this link where the Qatar World Cup initiatives expand boundaries for legacy potential in relation to current literature and an area that would benefit from some future legacy research. The analysis of the 2022 Qatar FIFA World Cup legacy documentation reveals a consistent and specific approach for obtaining set legacies. Based on the analysis, to add to the existing resources, a definition of legacy is proposed by the author for the Qatar 22 FIFA World Cup as follows. Legacy is specifically planned for anticipated outcomes and benefits. It is focused on long-term and sustainable improvements around tangible infrastructure that benefits human need and social development. Thank you. That concludes this presentation. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, sir. First of all, I would like to appreciate your very wonderful presentation, and by establishing a very good definitions to the legacy, you have given a very good support to the legacy based on the previous study, and that's a very commendable definitions you have come up with the legacy, especially in the context of the FIFA World Cup in Qatar upcoming Qatar FIFA. Thank you very much once again for your very good presentation. It's a very interesting. I would like the audience first, if they have any question for you, please, you can ask the question. Any question related to this presentation, please? Do we have any question?
Sorry, Mr. Davies. Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm just curious. Do you have collected the data or not?
For this one, it's kind of an interesting approach that we took. Well, I took for this, in that it's a new research theme. So the first step I took was to conduct a literature review, and then to analyze and collect all the times that legacy has been defined in literature. People talk about legacy in their research writing, but never really define what it is. And so I collated all the documentation that expressed an actual definition. I analyzed the characteristics of that, and I compared it with an upcoming event, which is the Qatar 2022 World Cup. And from that, I kind of defined what legacy, how it could be described, to create definitions, and then did one based on the research for the Qatar 2022 World Cup. So in terms of an approach, it's quite a kind of a unique approach rather than a traditional data collection, interviews, and so forth. It's a little bit different. But my other research, I am going to do extensive interviews and collate some specific data in relation to some legacy initiatives for the Qatar World Cup.
So I suspect your data collection will begin after Qatar World Cup 2022.
Yes, and certainly I need to get some information after the event, because legacy is not just for the 2 weeks or however long the event takes place. It's what happens afterwards. So I'm more interested in what happens post-event, and so a lot of my further research will be based on events that are happening after 2022. But thank you ever so much for your question.
Thank you very much, sir, for your answer to the doctor question. There was a question in mind which is also related to almost a similar question, and it's about the comparison, like whatever events we had in the past, especially in the sports context, where you are analyzing the sports context. So have you compared your definition in the past?
Well, there's so few definitions, and so lots of authors talk about legacy, but they kind of stick with the same definitions. And the problem with the whole research theme is that there isn't an agreed definition of what it is. So sustainability is more developed, and it has parameters for agreement for this is what it is in terms of the economic, the social, the environmental aspects. But legacy doesn't have that foundation yet. And so that's why academics are trying to have a wider discussion around, because it does go into, I've done research into various what we call legacy projects. So I did some work around the 2012 Olympic Games in London, but also for various projects as well that are happening, especially in the UK. So we're looking and we're analysing specific events and what legacies are being claimed, and trying to put some substance behind them to say, well, if you are making these claims, you know, what you need to kind of demonstrate in your development of your project, to kind of articulate, you know, what is being done, and we need to monitor to see if legacies are actually being achieved. So it's a research area in its infancy, but if anybody is interested in, and if this is an area that you feel you can contribute, I'm happy to discuss further, as I know that we're limited time, but please be in touch with myself, and you know, I can talk over any theme or assist in any research.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, and I really appreciate your work. That's very interesting. So, thank you very much.